Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. With me, as always, is the man himself, Eric J. Morin.
That sounded important. I like that one. That was a good one this week. That was a really good one.
I was running out of ideas. I had to mix it up a little bit. And the man just came to me about 5 seconds ago. And I was like, I'm going to roll with it.
Oh, man. Let's see. We'll start off with the sports podcast this morning. What's going on in sports? No, I'm just kidding.
It is the end of the year. So therefore, people are trying to position themselves to be the best team by the end of the year, which really means there's a lot of teams that are just taking the end of the year off. You'll kind of see a lot of teams, and you'll see a lot of dental practices do that as well, where holiday seasons come in, they're trying to get around families, and you'll start to see lack of performance.
When people go like, yeah, we took 3 weeks in December off. I'm like, okay. Our December was a little low. I'm like, you think?
In December in dental practice is pretty busy. A lot of people are home. So I think, some of our best clients take advantage of that. And then come January, when people start getting back in the flow of it, that's when they start looking at the business themselves. What can they do to set themselves up? But that's for another day podcast. Today in particular, I want to talk about a hot topic that it's the end of the year. I know there's a lot of sales reps calling dental practices. I know there's a lot of people trying to get them to buy something for them to help with taxes. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that and if we could touch on that subject a little bit.
It's never let the tax tail wag the dog. So this is a saying that you'll hear is never let the tax tail wag the dog. It's interesting because I was explaining, we had a workshop this weekend and I showed ultimately profitability. And I showed that profitability doesn't keep the lights on, cash flow does. And there's a big difference between cash flow and profitability. Completely. They're not even the same thing. You can be profitable and go out of business. This is what we don't understand. And so I was explaining it and I was kind of drawing it out for some doctors this last weekend. And what happens is that, if you need something, so for instance, if you were about to buy a piece of equipment that you need, and you were going to decide to buy it December 15th versus January 15th, okay, then that's a purchase that makes sense because you were just about to buy it. If you're already going to buy it anyhow, well, it would make sense to ultimately probably buy it this year. And that's going to reduce ultimately your tax liability. But that's not why we buy things. So we don't want to, first of all, if you throw a bunch of stuff on December to reduce your tax liability, I want you to understand that most valuations are figured out on EBITDA these days. Okay. So what ends up happening is ultimately you're hurting your profitability of your business. Now, somebody evaluating your business might unwind that and might be able to see that you did that and unwind it. But it doesn't make sense because what ends up happening is January comes and I've seen it so many times in my career where January comes, the doctor says, I've got no money. Yeah, you've got no money because someone told you to buy a bunch of crap that you do not need at the end of the year so that you could save on taxes, not realizing that if you had the capital in your bank account, you could now invest it into all kinds of things that actually would grow your business. And so what we do is we give up business growth. We're literally stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies, because someone is getting commission at the end of the year to try to sell you a bunch of crap. If you don't think the supply companies and everyone gets around at the beginning of December and goes, how do we sell a bunch of shit that people don't need? You're crazy. Like that's what happens. And I'm not, by the way, to be fair,
happens in every industry too.
Yeah. I'm not beating up supply companies, by the way. I really am not. I'm just being very frank and open and honest, and I'm not beating them up because ultimately there's a lot of you that need to buy stuff. And this is a great time for them to make sure that you're aware that if you're going to buy it anyhow, this would be a great time to buy it. So I'm not beating up supply companies, but I am saying that when we go to look at this and we start to say, hey, let's make some decisions around our buying, we don't buy a lot of stuff that we don't need. That's what it called. Never let the tax tail wag the dog, because CPAs are trying to create value. And so by trying to create value, they're going to, instead of going to do research and in their own education on other ways that you could save money on taxes and becoming educated in sophistication around taxes, instead, they've got two pieces of advice: 401k and buy a bunch of crap you don't need. And so that's, by the way, if that's the only advice you get is 401k and buy crap you don't need, then fire your tax CPA. Like you heard it here on the
Probably outgrown them.
Yeah, you've outgrown them because it's because that person doesn't really truly understand tax law, hasn't educated themselves in tax law, hasn't really truly looked at the benefits that they can create for you. They're more scared that something might blow back on them than trying to actually save you money. And the idea of just buying a bunch of crap you don't need, it just doesn't even make sense. There are some things you can prepay because it would make sense, of course. And there is equipment that you might need that you would go ahead and buy because you're going to need it anyhow. So those things happen. But I have seen people spend $200,000, $300,000 of cash at the end of the year. And it's not like you save 200,000. Just so you know, if you spend 200,000, you don't save 200,000. That's not how this works. Okay. No. So what ends up happening is now you're only saving a percentage of that. And so now what ends up happening is you're putting out all this capital. Now you have to understand opportunity costs. Now, see, I'm getting fired up this morning on the Double L podcast because this shit, because it makes me upset.
We try to tell people to treat this as a business. And my first two jobs out of college, I was in sales roles. And just to give you guys a background of business as a whole, literally I had sales managers say, this is buying season. The end of the year is buying season because companies have this budget set out and they have to utilize it. Otherwise, they're going to pay the tax man. So it's the same thing for the dental world. It's the people that are coming to your office are trained to call you heavily during this time to get you to buy something. And they are going to try to convince you that this is going to be the greatest thing for your practice. And I think we had a couple doctors at our last, not this past foundation this past weekend, but the other foundation that bought scanners or bought, these big lasers and things like that towards the end of last year because they thought that was what they should do. And I think that's kind of, getting ahead of that because this is going to happen every year. You need to start realizing that this will happen again and being prepared for it.
Well, and I will tell you, if you listen to this podcast and you bought a bunch of crap you don't need, see if you can send it back. I'm serious because it's even supplies. So let's just say we say, well, I bought a bunch of supplies I don't need now, but they gave me a discount for buying in December. It's called holding costs. There's something called holding cost of holding that inventory. There is a cost to it. And the cost, ultimately, the biggest cost is what you could have done with the same capital during that time. Now, if you were just going to waste the money and take it home and buy a bunch of stuff that personally you don't need, then yeah, buy a bunch of crap you don't need for the business and reduce your tax liabilities. Because if you were just going to waste it anyhow, that's different. But if you're a serious business owner, and I don't think you listen to Dental Wealth podcast unless you're a serious business owner. If you're a serious business owner, then you go, no, I would never do that. That's the most ridiculous thing. And so we come to the end of the year and there are smart moves we can make from a tax standpoint. There are advantageous strategies that we can utilize from a tax standpoint, but buying stuff that we don't need is not a strategy in any way. It's an insult to your intelligence. It really is, because they're not really explaining to you why that isn't really advantageous. But understand, as I've said before, CPAs go to school to learn about taxes and expenses. So a CPA would tell you increase expenses to reduce taxes. Why in the world would a tax CPA tell you that? Because they went to school for taxes and expenses. So of course they're going to tell you that, because that's what they're educated on. Now you won't hear, when was the last time your CPA gave you a statement of cash flows? They don't, because they're not educated on cash flows, because that's not what they care about. They don't care about cash flows, but you do. I guarantee you cash flows matter to you. You pay your team with cash flows. Cash flows are what's most important. Cash flows give you the ability to do so many things within your business. And if not anything else, it reduces your stress within your business, having access to capital. We saw that when the government gave out PPP loans. A lot of you were stressed from a cash standpoint. You got a PPP infusion. You're like, oh, I can breathe again. Well, buying a bunch of stuff at the end of the year and then waiting 3 or 4 or 5 months. Remember, if your top tax bracket's 40%, just think about this for a second. I want you to think about this. You don't start actually making a paycheck. If you want to think about that, till almost like June, May, June, you don't get paid. You literally are working the first 4 or 5 months for the government. Okay. So, I mean, I tell you that because look, that means they're already taking that much. That means the rest of that, you need to be able to obviously pay for your own personal expenses, but you need to have capital to invest back in this business, capital that ultimately should be reinvested in the right places. If you're going to reinvest at the end of the year, reinvest something that has a strategic return. So if you're going to do that, say, okay, what can I invest in right now that ultimately will give me massive return in January, February, March, April? Because if I'm going to trade cash out, okay, if I'm going to hand cash, then I want a cash infusion back. So I don't go buy a lot of things that are going to be sitting on shelves. I don't buy stuff that's going to be doing nothing. I'm going to go buy things that ultimately will increase my cash standpoint because I want that capital in the next year. If the government's already making me work basically 5 months for free, then I'm not going to, I got to save the capital I can because I already know they're taking 4 or 5 months. And so capital becomes really, really important. And having cash is really, really important. And look, 2021, economy's high, the stock market's high, everything's going really well. Because of that, it gives a false sense of security. So what ends up happening is people go, well, I don't need to save money. Look how great everything's going. Well, everything's going great because most people got $150,000, $200,000, $300,000 infusions of cash into their business, which was huge for a lot of you. That was your tax liability for the year, which is huge. You're not getting that in 2022. It's not happening. So if you go spend a bunch of capital, you don't need to spend at the end of the year to ultimately save on your taxes. When 2022 comes around and you need to make capital infusions into the business, you won't have to be able to do it. Then you'll have to go take out a loan, right? Which ultimately the principal is paid back with after-tax money, which you're not really understanding that that's on the balance sheet, not the P&L. And all of a sudden you're wondering where all your money went again.
Yeah. What would you say? I know you work with a lot of your, the high level doctors. Is there any, can you give an example of a good investment a practice has made at the end of the year that paid dividends in the new year? Is there any type of example you can think of? And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot because you work with so many clients. Is there one in particular that you could say, this is a great example of a good one, and maybe this is a good example of a bad one?
I think that there's some things that you might want to do at the end of the year. For instance, I'm obviously marketing, depending on the type of marketing, especially if there's any initial, setup costs or anything like that, that would make sense because if you're getting that going in December, there might be an initial cost to that would make sense. If you have a consulting relationship where ultimately speaking, you've got some kind of consulting, and you've got the cash sitting there, especially if you're like tower leadership, you get massive ROIs, then that might make sense. If you've got a piece of equipment that will yield you results right away, then that makes sense. So i.e. like December and January and February and March. And then sometimes it's things like team members. We just brought 2 team members on in the last 30 days. And there's some recruiting fees that go along with that. Like that might make sense because now going into the new year, I've got team that I otherwise wouldn't have, highly talented individuals that will give me ROI in January. Right. So I'm going to make sure I've got the right team in place. I'm going to put money in marketing. Right. So just stop right there. Team and marketing is huge because if I have the right team in place, and I have the right marketing in place, well, now I've got really the setup to truly have a massive ROI in January, right? So that's actually going to give me a return right away. If I got to buy a piece of equipment that I then have to have somebody come out in January and train, then it takes us 3 months to get up to speed. Then we got to learn language around it. Then probably not, that doesn't make a lot of sense because I'm not going to get ROI. I'd rather put the money into team or into marketing or something to that effect. If I'm not doing any kind of consulting, I'm going to go ahead and initiate that relationship typically in December because I know I need it. And by the way, some of you might listen right now. Like as soon as I say that, some of you go, well, he's just trying to serve. He wants people to sign up for tower leadership and all this stuff. And let me just, so you guys understand, I also pay for coaching and I pay a hell of a lot more than most of you pay for coaching. So everybody, the top companies, Matthew, we were talking about this weekend. Look, go back. What do you think Ernst & Young, go back, Ernst & Young, who do you think they're consulting for? If you go to KPMG, who do you think they're consulting for? These large companies so large major corporations all pay for consulting, all of them. Every major corporation pays for consulting. How is it that the billion-dollar companies pay for consulting, but you've got all the answers? That's ridiculous. There's the idea of, but by the way, if you own a company and you don't have some type of consulting, that's a huge mistake. There's no way. First of all, you're up against the wall. You can't see all the things. You need someone else to be looking at it with you. And second of all, like, you should have other people giving you ideas, giving you solutions, being creative, helping you with the next thought process. You should be constantly increasing your business acumen. So the idea of someone going, I've got all the answers. That's why you're not growing. It's so crazy. You have to be humble enough. The most successful people are humble enough to realize I don't have all the answers. If you literally think you can listen to podcasts, for instance, and go, well, the podcast will give me all the answers I need in my life. Well, then you're missing out on millions of dollars. I mean that, millions of dollars. And so I start looking at that and start saying, look, I mean,
and it's truly a business consultant. It's not, if you're saying, well, I have my CPA and I have my financial advisor, these billion-dollar companies, they need a business consultant that's going to look at their business objectively and say, all right, this is where you're missing. These are the areas you need to focus on. These are the numbers that you're missing out on. Here's the next steps. If you're going to your CPA or if you're going to your financial advisor and asking all these questions, that is not a business consultant. That is not someone that's they'll help you get to a certain point, but they're not going to help you go from 2 million to 6 million. I can guarantee you that. We've never had someone in your leaders level ever come to you and say, I got to this point because of my CPA or my financial advisor. Never happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to go back and say, where do I need to invest? So let's just pull it back for a second. In December, here's what you should be investing on. Things that will make your cash flow increase. I said cash flow increase in the next year. Things that will help have a less stress in the next year. Things that will provide more scalability in the next year. The things that ultimately, when you wake up 12 months from now and you go, man, it's been the best year ever. I have literally, I'm smiling from ear to ear. What would have to happen in your business for you ultimately to feel like this was your best year ever? And then you go back and say, okay, well, hold on. What would that mean? Well, usually that growth, that's profitability, that's team, so we go, okay. So this piece of equipment wasn't in that equation at all. Nobody wakes up and, I've never heard someone in December say, if I woke up and I was really great at sleep dentistry in 12 months, that's really where I would know. It's like, okay, what would give me peace in the next 12 months? If I woke up 12 months from now and I was looking at my practice and I said, this is the best year of my entire professional career, what would have had to happen in that year for that to happen? And then when we go back and we make investments that ultimately would yield that result, that help us on that path, because then we start to say, okay, well, that would make sense. I would need somebody else. I mean, and go back to this. I mean, you got to want this stuff. I mean, I had a coaching call on Sunday from 2 to 4. I mean, are you willing to put in the time from 2 to 4? Or on a Sunday, are you willing to get up early? Are you willing to stay late? Are you willing to do the things so that you can? One of the best things I ever heard, by the way, is work hard now or work hard later. I tell my kids that. I'm like, hey, they're like, homework stinks. I'm like, well, work hard now or work hard later. I mean, it's really up to you. I mean, you want to be working when you're 78 years old because you have to. Well, that's up to you, but I don't. And so. Yeah. When we go back to your year and say, what are the things I could invest in that would get me there, that would yield me that kind of result?
And I think it's crucial to point out, so if you made a mistake this year, okay, you should be monitoring this next year, starting in January. One of the things we do as a finance committee is we look at the numbers within the organization. We say, all right, this is what our tax liability is going to be for the month. And we save for that. So at the end of the year, we have predictability and say, all right, we have this much in taxes that we have in an account. How do we reduce this? What strategic way can we reduce this tax liability? What investments can we make? Just like you're saying, is we know predictability within the business that we can do this. I think a lot of times doctors get stressed out because they don't have that predictability. And then randomly their CPS says, okay, well, you need to do this much in taxes. So you need to spend this much in order to reduce it. And they get that information November 1st or December 1st. They get to the last second of the year and they're like, you owe this much in taxes. There's one of two things you can do: pay the piper, or you can start buying stuff. And I think we see that all the time in
Such a
dentistry.
good point. Yeah. I mean, I think that happens all the time is because you guys have, and I'm just being honest with everyone listening. Most of your CPAs should be fired. I'm serious. Like that might be controversial to say, but it's just true. I see some of the worst accounting and tax in the dental industry than any other industry. I think it's because of the size of the companies. And you know, if someone's calling you up in December to tell you that your tax liability, then look, that shouldn't happen. I agree that you should know your tax liability in 2022. At January, you should know what it is for January. In February, you should know what it is for February. When you get to March, there should be a phone call. And you should true it up and say, hey, look, okay, so I've got $250,000 set aside for taxes. Is that enough? And to be completely honest with you, if you're looking through your financial statements, if you're actually looking at it, it's not hard to take a percentage of the net income on your, most of you are cash-based businesses, okay? So cash-based means, here we go. This is the accounting corner. So just so you guys know, okay, here's a little accounting knowledge, okay? There's cash-based and there's accrual-based. Most companies are on accrual. Okay. So that means that they recognize revenue as services are typically delivered. And so what I mean by that is, let's just say that somebody paid prepaid tower leadership and they gave me, it helps with the example. They paid me, I'm just going to say they cut me a check for whatever it was. Let's just say 50 grand or whatever it was. And they said, okay, here's a check for 50 grand, Erica. You're going to grow up my business, a few million for 50 grand. By the way, great ROI. And so here's 50 grand. Okay. Well, I'm accrual based, which means I don't actually show that $50,000 in revenue today. I actually show it every month as it's earned, because that's how accrual based works, is that I actually show it because if for instance, if I took in $50,000 today, and then the IRS would come in and say, well, we want our percentage of it, but I haven't delivered the services yet, which means now I have to deliver the on post-tax money, which that would never work, right? So that's for most businesses. That's how it works for most businesses. Now, a dental office is cash-based. That means that literally it's cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out. So your P&L literally shows that this is the actual cash that came in, just like if the 50,000 came in and you paid 50,000 expenses, that's how it works. So yeah. I never met a dental practice on accrual based, nor should a dental practice ever be on accrual based. So when you look at your net income, okay, if you got your financial statement and you look at the net income, that is revenues minus expense, the actual revenue minus expenses. So then you can take a percentage typically of that number, and it should tell you basically at least some type of an estimate of your tax liability, because you can take a percentage. So it's really easy when you're a cash-based business to figure out what your tax liability is, because to give the accountant some credit, now that I've beat up on some CPAs, by the way, just this is like my little disclaimer. I love really great tax CPAs. I really have great friends that are tax CPAs. I'm not saying that there's not please do not. I love a great tax CPA. I'm saying there's a lot of incompetence in this industry in that area. It's just the truth. But also to give them some credit, look, sometimes I have doctors that'll take 500 grand, not my clients, but they have taken 500 grand out in like distributions. And then they'll get a phone call from the tax CPA and they'll say like, you owe us 200 grand or you owe 200 grand. They'll be like, what? I didn't know I owned taxes. I'm like, you took out $500,000. You didn't think you owned anything in taxes? I mean, okay. So look, it does go both ways to back up some of the tax CPAs. They get beat up when it's like, you've been cutting yourself $50,000 checks every month. You didn't think there was anything due to taxes? Come on. I don't believe that. I mean, that's a little ridiculous. But I think that what we do, we're a little all over the place, but because we're kind of talking about some subjects that are really important to you, because I think that you need to understand that your number one job as a business owner is to create cash flow. Okay. Now, second, believe it or not, I mean, you say, well, no, my job is to take care of patients. Okay. That's what you do. That is your widget. Okay. That is your product or service. Okay. But the business itself, you've got to create cash flow, access to capital. You think the bank cares about cash? When they're looking at lending you money, they're looking at the cash flow. That's what they're ultimately looking at. They're saying, how much cash flow does this doctor have access to. They're looking at your personal financial statement because they're saying, okay, Dr. Smith has access to $10,000 a month of cash flow and he's spending $9,000. No, we don't want to give him any money. So what ends up happening is they're looking at your actual cash flow. Cash flow is one of the most important things in business. So you have to look at cash flow. Profitability technically is the second thing. And so you go, okay, I got to be profitable. If you're not profitable, you're not really running a business. A new business is one thing, but if you're 4 or 5 years old, and you're not showing a profit, then you need to kind of figure out something else.
Yeah. Something's not working.
And then top line revenue growth is, gross revenues are important, but you can grow and grow and not be profitable. So that's why I said profitability matters. I think that you also have to look in your business and look at leading and lagging indicators and figure out which ones are going to make the most sense in the new year. And what leading and lagging indicators are you going to focus on? And then start putting aside the money right away. I think that there's nothing worse than having a tax liability. For instance, if you paid off a bunch of debt, you paid off $100,000 or $200,000 worth of debt, and then you get a phone call saying you owe $200,000. It'll take the wind out of your sails. You'll feel like, oh my gosh, all this hard work I've done is for nothing. So having the right advice around tax liability. And by the way, you buy a bunch of equipment and you still have a big giant tax bill. Now you're still now you got a bunch of equipment you didn't need and a huge tax bill. So I think it's really going back through and pulling it back and saying, look, what is going to give me the biggest advantage in the next year? First, from a cash standpoint, what's going to produce the most profitability, the most cash on cash return? What is going to give me that? That's where I need to put my money first. That's the number one thing I need. Equipment, only if I needed this equipment really bad. I was going to buy it in January anyhow, so I might as well go ahead and buy it now. That will make some sense. Outside of that, don't buy a bunch of stuff you don't need. Ultimately speaking, even if you start to say there's 4 things I need, put the one that's going to provide the most cash on cash return first. Put that one first and list them out: first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Then use that order and see, and then utilize that order to make the decision-making process. And you'll find that oftentimes a lot of the things that you're being told to buy have the lowest cash on cash return. So you should probably hold off buying them anyhow. I get fired up on this subject. I get fired up.
Great end of the year podcast. This happens. I get phone calls all the time, and I know you're getting questions about it. It's the end of the year. What do I got this much in taxes due? What do I need to invest in? What do I do? And I think the message where you started with is don't let the tax tail wag the dog. I think if you're listening to this podcast right now and you got one thing out of it, it is that know what you need to invest in, and that'll get you the return the quickest come January 1. I think that's the simplest answer to the question is, what do I invest in now? Look at the ROI. I think a lot of times they get so caught up in other things that they forget to look at how quickly can I get the return on this investment, and when is it going to start paying me dividends? If you can determine that before you make the investment, you will be in much better success when the new year starts.
Good podcast. I get fired up on this subject because I want to see you. Sometimes we see so much bad advice, guys. We see so much bad advice. I couldn't even, if you lived in my world for a few days and you've seen some of the advice that has been given to doctors, it would make you literally want to vomit. Like, some of the advice out there is so bad. And so it's the so-called experts, it's really bad. So, make sure the sophistication around the advice you receive is the right financial advice, because there's a lot of people peddling a bunch of stuff that's not really good advice out there. And so you got to kind of be wary of that stuff and make sure you're getting the right advice, especially during this end of the year tax season. It is still a tax season and it's a business season. I hope you guys are having an awesome end of the year. I get pumped up over this and fired up because of what I've seen happen to clients that have come in. We fix it and we unwind all that stuff, but sometimes it's a big mess. So do the right thing.
We're coming up on some exciting news for the Dental Wealth podcast. We're approaching the 150th episode. This on January 4th, we will be launching the 150th Dental Wealth podcast episode, which is It's crazy to even say that there's 150 of these. And during that podcast, we're going to be doing a prize giveaway. And I wanted to go ahead and let you guys know, when you tune in, we want you to tune in virtually this time. So we want you to watch us on YouTube. If you can watch us on YouTube, here's your instruction. So this is what you have to do in order to win the prize. All right. Are you ready for? I don't even know if Eric knows this yet. Me and the marketing team were putting this together.
I have no idea what you're talking about, honestly.
The 150th episode, January 4th, it will be launched. We're going to do something special. We are going to show a question on the screen. So you have to be watching on YouTube. A question will appear.
So Reese is holding up a sticky note that says Wednesday the 5th.
Oh, it's going to be on the 5th, Wednesday the 5th. This is the first episode of the new year. First episode of the new year. We are going to be asking a question. So you'll see a question appear on the screen. The first person to email to info@towerleadership.com. Again, info@towerleadership.com with the answer and a screenshot of you subscribing to the YouTube channel. That is the key here. We want you guys to subscribe so you can get updates. You know, when episodes are launched, you'll start getting more and more Tower Leadership info if we post anything strategic for your business on there. If you answer the question, take a screenshot of you subscribing and send that in to us, the first person will win a prize. So you're going to want to tune in for that episode. Again, that is now Wednesday, January 5th in the new year. We're going to be celebrating the 150th episode. You know, we put a lot of effort into this. I know Eric's been doing this for quite some time now, and we're getting a lot of great feedback. A lot of you guys have emailed in topics you want us to talk about. You've given us, you know, glowing reviews, I would say. You know, this is why we do it. I think, you know, Eric, he's super passionate about this. I know he came to Tower Leadership 3 or 4 years ago. He's like, I want to start doing a podcast. And I think in the marketplace right now, we've gotten such great reviews that it was 100% worth doing. I enjoy doing it. I know he enjoys doing it. Tuesdays, we look forward to every single week, just so we can get the information in your guys' hands.
And on that note,
that was like the last spiel for the new year. We want you guys to have a great new year. As always, like, subscribe, visit the YouTube channel, tune in for the next week's 150th episode. We look forward to seeing you guys.
Have a good one.